to communicative spaces privilege those who can conform to marketable forms of affect by rewarding normality and conformity and excluding those who are deemed incompetent through perceiving disabled affect as parasitic due to literally slowing down the information. The desire to perform means disabilities always considered by affective labor and regulated to the bottom of the communicative register to causing violence and exclusion. Thus, the role of the balance to vote for the debate best challenges by a normative communicative structure. St. Pierre 1. Competition privileges able-bodied move quickly or efficiently meet the demands of labor intensification competencies necessary project marketable and desirable embodiment subject per drive to perform in normalized fashion allows all disabled bodies to be exploited. Industrial production redefined production has become informationalized manipulation of affect is central. Production has been communicative elevated to level of human relations informational connectivity competing and surviving disability threatens post-human subjectivity by being unmalleable and impermeable to information flow. Disabled communicatively marginalized insofar so affective labor concerned with producing marketable affects discomfort experience in the presence of disability. The drive to advertise yourself or those who stutter. You never advertise until you learn to talk, and this is part of a larger shift in socioeconomic career whereby semi-capitalism now requires information to move quickly and effortlessly. The result is the capacitation of certain disabled bodies at the expense of debilitating disfluent laborers. St. Pierre 2. Speech is now human capital. Acknowledges the fluency plays a central role. Semi-capitalism system requires information to move quickly and effortlessly. Fluency impels subjects to increase their information flow. Many disabled people who could not work have benefited. Yet such changes shift the socioeconomic terrain in threatening ways for others. The ability to regulate information has become a baseline for post-industrial labor, such that imperatives to sound right and possess excellent communication skills marginalized disfluent laborers and vote affirmative to endorse this fluency as an escape from the rigid structures of fluency and flight away from the linguistic politics of understanding our attention to disfluent voices is one that serves to resist to resist against the hegemony monolith constructs of language and allows for disabled objects to communicate through an interrupted speech. St. Pierre 3. Attention to fluent voices offers one to think about this actions particularly as resistance to hegemony. Fluent voices presume to signify monolithically and thus anticipate and linearly sustain the givenness of what is attention to fluency within disability studies, but as a type of politics of the voice considering interrupted speech spell of fluency lures and strings words from our mouth into lock and file order the capacity of disfluency less precisely in its flight from understanding in our methodology disfluency through the disabled object is a necessity in becoming responsive to the social situations of the communicative sphere of debate, working against the closures of our semiosis. St. Pierre 4. Disfluency calls a reorientation towards others through the body to stubborn materiality. Disability offers responsive to one or social situation. Fluency works to close the present moment such that nothing channelizes the human capacity for action within our communicative bodies to mitigate the possibilities of something apparatic interrupting by choosing over with the appearance of a choice system in which there's actually is no choice. Thick movements of collective acts and issues abstracting away from the conversations of the one you see are fundamentally recreating fluency in which the underlying structures necessitate the new mode of engagement to be removed. St. Pierre 5. Fluency smooths over the gaps of our encounters to close the site where new modes of subjectivity might be cultivated, forcibly resolved. This fluency skipping the superficial hegemonic meanings from body set of politics contested is not contained by state organized and approved spaces. They erupt in the classroom, on the street. Fluency works to cover over the discontinuities that constitute our experience by assigning a proper place and meaning to everything. And disability controls approximate cost and explains all other violences, treating those as inferiors only justified with the guise of disability seekers. And all 17. Disability denigrate minority politics to both physical, psychological flaws, rationality, emotions, and weakness. Racial inequality remains today an acceptable reason for unequal treatment. Other justifications have begun to fall away. No longer treat as inferior unless tied to disability. There will always be one less justification for inferior treatment tied to physical and mental difference. And the affirmative serves as a departure from the scenario planning fantasies that divorces ourselves from our body and forces internalized ableism to positing ourselves as those who make policies for us. Campbell 8. Internalized oppression is the result of mistreatment. We harbor pain and fear, turning them into weapons. Internalized ableism means that to assimilate into the norm, disabled people feel compelled to fabricate who they are, to separate existence from disabilities. Unattainable bodily detachment is filled with internalized ableism. The subject simulates what it is to be able whilst morphing ableist imperatives. Disabled people become complicit in their own demise, and exclusionary conceptions of topical correctness are violent congregate. 13. Scapegoat-centrism is a hallmark of Western imperialism. Only what is written is understood. The internal law of Western for many, particularly subaltern groups, texts are inaccessible or threatening the power of law is written on the backs of the subject. The hegemony of textualism needs to be exposed. Supremacy of Western law systems, erasing knowledge that is unlettered, and actually skip the Delgado evidence. View voting affirmative as an alternative to the exclusionary process of the status quo. How we as subjects are positioned in debate is a prerequisite in interpreting and understanding the resolution or its implications. How we know and view the debate is influenced by constructions of social reality through discourses of knowledge, not acts of simulation. Antonio 95. Persons over-identify with their positions and engage in gross fabrication to obtain advancement. They are so absurd in simulating effective role players. They have a trouble being anything else but actors' integrity and pleasure or undone over-concern about possibilities. Consequences of acts and rotation of socially appropriate mass reduces persons to hypothesize simulacra. I don't know why it's cut there. I will continue reading. simulation is so pervasive that it is hard to tell a genuine article. Imposters amplify the herd, they are violent and be as exploitative, and theory forces people to jump through hoops that they were then engage discussions of Parson Smith 13. Abstractions distance the conversation for reality that debaters deal with everyday norms, how competitors do intellectual gymnastics to escape hard conversations, that discussions of how we are not topical, always privilege elitism in debate. Read Berkeley. Wait, the norms of the debate are inextricably tied to the social performance of identity. The norms of privilege and style choice are white, straight, privileged males. The students of color are performatively white. In order to have an opportunity for achieving in debate competition, they signify a difference and opposite a negative differential. I'm good for calls.
What is the
The affirmative causes an advocacy needed that is good for disabled people, and we make arguments as to how that creates overarching good for disabled debaters and debaters.
So it doesn't have to be
We wouldn't say that. Our explanation of things like the Siebers evidence analyzes as to how things like the 1AC can create implicit spaces within debate, which is good for other people.
So what does it do for niggas?
That 1AC.
Okay, nothing. All right, judge, don't forget that. That's fine. Well, how does the affirmative, I guess you have these root cause claims, how does the affirmative able to explain specific instances of anti-blackness?
We explain specific instances through the guise of disability being the cause, for example.
Okay, that sounds perfect. How does the guise of disability explain why Derek Chauvin puts his knee on George Floyd's neck for over 9 minutes?
It would be analyzed as a means as to how people like black individuals were seen as disabled in that instance.
Wait, how? Or I guess why are black individuals viewed that way anyway?
The argument is that even like we do not make an overarching claim as to why black individuals are viewed that way. Rather, we make an
Okay, that sounds like a problem.
Yes.
Just remember that. Okay, continue. You can continue.
Oh, sorry. I thought you were going to ask.
No, I'm talking to the judges.
Yeah, okay. The second, or what we say. Sorry, you know where I left off? What was the part?
I mean, I'm just trying to understand how does the guise of this.
Yeah.
Why are black people viewed as disabled?
Oh yeah. Okay. So the argument is that it's disability. It does not explain as to why or black people.
Oh, wait, what?
The argument is that we control things like proximate violence towards people insofar that the justifications
Okay, you're not really saying
proximate violence.
anything. Is there an explanation for the affirmative on why blackness is viewed as disabled?
No, there's not.
Okay. Now, when the 1 year on 2 year says otherwise, everyone remember this. That's perfect. I guess with that, how is there a kind of a root cause claim for the affirmative? That missing internal link?
The Siebers evidence analyzes as to how things like status quo violence is experienced by people under the guise of disability. Which was the explanation before?
Okay, just so it explains violence, it's not the black people.
Well, sorry?
It explains violence, it's not the black people.
No, the argument is for other reasons.
Wait, how do we know that black people are viewed as disabled?
Because of the justifications for things like violence. Empirically, you can see things like slavery, etc. The colonial genocide has all been on the premise as to how like the
So
white
is all
man
anti-blackness due to black people being viewed as disabled?
we say that is the justification for all violence.
All anti-blackness. Okay, sure. What is disfluency?
Disfluencies are positing away from fluent structures like debate is where we take lines of flight, where we create strategies, where we feel what it means to have things like disabled communication that's outlined by the same period.
Alright, what does that do for my mom?
We haven't made arguments as to what it would do. We said it would do good stuff for us as disabled people in debate.
Alright, that's screening case. Yeah, get good on this. interpretation for evidence was have a framing evidence for someone who's organic and intellectual stuff like a car who active theory or subject capable of affirmative super someone who does number for college university major racial education major publication will big violation all the evidence from people in the academy won't wait for the building will consider who went after people way outside of the university accident sort of went for resisting popular activity who was struggling really politics schools material listening to bicycle oversight to people with the closest proximity to the widest embraces it was a struggle white person who was going to go for physician and deacon black people black people the only way to break it down so observation sympathy force exclusionary active language creates barriers and student babies who have had recent negations have intellectual literature those who have not their engagement actual also bars that rates have not many obligations to intellectual unless they have based on total accuracy efforts to also remind those who are in average there's no way for people outside of the academy to be able to organize for the theory how they're able to have accurate excellent theory power license training who was the people who was always supportability is voted is only valuable to education it can change lives of those who outside the base supportability is interested in medical no famous education domestic debate is not fair of all debates not can apply their education on lives and debate is not educational debate is not implement their education change only communities also applies to things like accessibility it doesn't matter if it can be exportable to how it is accessible outside of the base to main street outside see actually apping on volume watch shall be tolerant for freedom education reasonably the judgment religion have to watch not essentially what you say in no organized never turns or independent reason drop organized more wide reasons to because the one is your wrong we produce kinds of causes harsh quantity once you back to yourself do not let the way the case gets a show because that lost aim by person using antibiotics to justify racism second off counter this we read that Claudia Taylor APS speaking something in the defense of one is reimagine niggas speaking on one who are the rest who risk participate in a relation now they say silently the black so it's poor structure king no I can't teach you an actual example of the way president was writing or making sensible Mexican to those who black and urban the documents are not allowed to read black into life and social political workers are activated and invisible annotation appears that like that asterisk and annotation mark black annotation would activate black life visible and make the black and chronicle failure words hold black life annotation never in action those second office here by family failures and murder combination awake the second office perform on my grounds because my family show injury to show the harm that I'm proud of my security the second office form the describe your adventure of an box is flaming after one invitation because they like that the similarity also produces black this is an infused and rewarding now people for the relation of waxes they hearily bond sense from the waxes which is best more relationality baby and rule of free sort of wax campaign often the foundation of the being position overall leisure around leisure facts specific like black is anti-black is singularity black is solidarity was solidarity never exists anti-black is singularity no equivalent force we understand anti-black is has a concept black is honest people force black is place to begin to find anti-black is global force and wives on the lives inside doing anti-black is good on the same possibilities of friends unfriendly because always the black fashion was sort of black is third off the three pillars of social that define us like make show blackness it's been how black is always said out of the killing from the political society it's sort of being the role of us best nerd chatting from slave Wilson put it the secret is elements say truth foundation just on annihilation make us best some sort of rejection our first clarifies errors are reconciled with between bonds captain or white from the only hand white bonds and white so that's that bonds say which side in A65 slave relation of the event not a bit of a place analogy this part right for black side human lives people black that exist in the cohesion is unsubstantive black social that who are selected as great and blacks and slaves are actually bound and not politics humanize the influence of identities for black parties and then humanize black side because it's structurally impossible can only you in black side ears this thing that's in black space will belong to say part of the civil side to social reforms and racial methods this is negative or belief and create blackness the condition of create for white conversation recovery rights to external comments therefore describe the activity and analysis while facing communication black side rebounded no one from identity policy and typical black place environment side from just study revolution practice basically being obviously a lot of not analogize like civil society our best work from identity politics black citizenship the symbolic capacity like last year for diamond structures the citizenship no race and symbolic conversation black life which is just for white the grammar what's everything that's good and Bob Marley in a will it's just why we need to burn out society or physically slave to the world I was a prisoner of face standing over media war just in the universe of brutality how many rivers we have to cross all that we got to see that we have lost we really paid the cost burning in the loot tonight we're gonna burn in the loot one more thing burning all blue tonight oh yeah burning illusion tonight case 13 PMs will not apply because this is one of the counters are kind of theory interpretations of one of the counters whiteness in order to debate in favor of black and so overview to the case arguments so how does way black is outweighs the affirmative the 8-point social title over terms way black is black is black is viewed in negative ways and so makes displays not always typical you cannot prescribe that dignity or to an individual just foreseen which means that Voss can never be gratuitous for example when Chamber Market stopping streets because he is black his George Simmons is discussed by female techniques color concern your theories whitewash to us how you display beyond specific ways decided black theory makes who one is if a few kids away from black means whenever we can discuss form of the black so we didn't attempt to include white with the discussion to the quick struggle black state body without the nominal state versus orthodox structure now said real country would not be true such conversation is it like because places got in black is the conversation of minority areas and next is cultural rehabilitation turned to state bonds were excluded from academy university literature not discussing their bonds your only critique agrees with this because being a good idea to avoid a solution to the ableism the one is his neoliberal project of labor introducement of the case through the lens of present literature within the debate which only kind of constructs education experience could not say well I just wanted to piggyback on the new wave of literature next highest amount of opinion even not people always listen to black people not people look at black people with gratitude because they're not like I they recognize their humanity I recognize they're not black just by that's right on the line argument this fluency argument no the last line across examination was damning so that's not exportable for niggas outside the debate you can explain what does you want to see do for black mamas not debate shows how this kind of this fluency methodology is not anything for black
bodies who are black bodies should not rated as disabled or kind of within academia next safety year. Community arrested for this internal also like to say why this is hijacked because we have a specific thesis framing a method that can grab both the noise of wax in the intersection with the communication register ability to have antibiotics business with the both wax having antibiotics express pain inside of by wax in the hospital order to leave and she process some pain wax reduces something around the around the college can I communicate antibiotics to communication or how you go out status with communication anything for both pain or blood approaches this charge just into walk to the injured and you charge for this was the police or the officers that heard you 2 seconds swing the lines that place you can move for lunch not to go what's only recorded how you are just rest to the door to the zins 140 about the carrying about the cell you later about guard as you are the course you was clearing up the first end this was murder now the root cause argument turn to use this was overarching explanation of bonds that ain't like people over the effects and by policing and repeating about politics because shit the ways our folks in the rest of bonds of just a structure of the affirming next evidence lacks specific black and sure disbelief may be able to continue circumstances sexism homophobia racism but gratuitous harassment bonds that is known as anti-black that is not explained by the evidence 6 proves there's no explanation for why blacks is viewed as this disabled shows that the affirmative is not reverse causal even if they want to reverse causal must say year 5 we don't necessarily wait for no one conversation with strengthening them to your power for the black say why they make you want to see possible through working against the ultimate self case they're not radical they are radical but not radical enough anything that doesn't result in complete terror into the world allows whiteness to procreate to have one came local building trying to eat and make the prescribed points of white person result in ableist about Africa says that ignores the way black people does have their access influence as a result of the disbeliefs how Kanye West will even say for choice of black women having super years to be less of white people also look for the able sex because you're too hard focused on myself as individuals next are experience for power method for comfort about salt links or villas 16 black bodies is combined without gender well scientific co second relation for the black state waters are from around your violence context years having welcome that knowledge cover term report term occurs when body becomes alive chaotic where Sunday is insanity dehumanization for knowledge for disbeliefs able discourse is lower this is why racialization is about for consensus for white society cover change for it no for a problem because physical with the consultation by the people in the here acts in the North Phillips was at the moment when one for transform the cargo the transform the back became same bus became black the black and say what that just tropes to do deal any different with our country just produced for the appropriation of proper black say what is were subject to the most brutal violence. Perfect place to end. Correct there. Yeah.
Starting on the first off, I guess, is everyone who works within the university or academia bad?
I think the argument is that there's unique value in oriented intellectuals as evidence in kind of modes of thought that we present within spaces, like spaces in the academy.
Why is this uniquely for the affirmative?
Well, do you not see the off? That's a organic intellectual right there.
Okay.
My method is not violent, but shit, yours does.
And this is just like a single advocate that's outside of the university?
I mean, it doesn't have to, but it can be. It's more about a model of debate, like models of debate that forefront methodologies and framing mechanisms that are not just from people of the academy, but from the communities that we're discussing.
Okay. That's fine. The second off, does this include non-disabled people?
It includes non-black people.
Oh, sorry. The counterclaim text, does that include like non-disabled black people?
It includes non-black people.
Can you explain that?
What needs explanation?
Like I'm confused. Can you explain the counterclaim text, like what it does?
Yeah, it's basically one is redacting your non-blackness as a speaking subject of the affirmative, and annotating it to modes of black thought and communication.
What does like redacting mean in the context of the language?
Go on.
And then, can you explain the second part again?
Yeah, it's annotation, i.e. inserting blackness within this. For example, the kind of plan, the reason you'd be voting for me is because you're inserting me as a speaking subject of the one issue.
Right. Makes sense. The third off, the status of the alternative.
What do you want it to be?
Whatever you want it to be.
All right, now we're kind of bad. You got a choice.
Okay. That's fine. The case arguments, what are all the independent reasons to impute?
What does that mean?
Are there like independent voting issues or things that come in higher layer than the 3 offs that were read?
No.
Can you explain like the structural claim and the Brady evidence?
Oh yeah, sure. I think it's a hijack of the way to communication. You've been in like a communication, and I'm applying this to black disabled bodies. Cross-examination proves that there's like an inability for you to explain the nuances of how your affirmative, like you're gonna make the arguments in the 1 year and 2 year without the warrants or evidence to back it up. So I'm providing that evidence now.
Okay. Is this premised off of an ontological claim on the complete?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, but at the same time, it's like a material event that happens, so like, I don't Yeah. The alternative solves case because, from my understanding, the affirmative does not result in the end of the world, and I think that anything that falls short of that is cool, but it's not radical enough. Insofar as the structures of like whiteness and oppression continue to stay intact.
Affirmative pressure. I have 48 remaining. No doc. It'll be case, beginning with an overview. Case proper. Awesome order. Actually, no, sorry. It's going to be first off, third off.
Monkey overview on a separate page.
No, I don't think it's really that long.
Where's the overview again?
It'll be on the case page. It's not super long. Anyone not good?
Except the rule of basketball for the debater who best challenges or who best deconstructs binary systems of communication. That was the debater structure to alone and disable communication, causing infinite amounts for disabled bodies, whether it be speed rules or ASL being better one imposed to be using personal systems of disfluency to create modes of peace and a flight from these norms. That's the same here 1, 3, and 4 out that outweighs on probability because you can vote for things like certain norms in this round. Comes to the highest layer. The framing issue in all these arguments is that you should view this round through a lens of solvency. You can affirm specific modes of strategy for us to deconstruct things like binormativity within the debate space, but you cannot resolve any of their external impacts. effects, which we'll get to more on the framework page, which means that risk of things like material strategies coming off the 1C should be sufficient to affirm. Now, the top level, we're not with top levels that will go respond to the Brady 12 hijack 8 points. There's no warrant as to how this, there is no warrant as to why that's a unique, there is no warrant as to how they have any type of explanatory as to how the structure of it in and of itself is something that is uniquely discriminatory, which is all of our explanation on things like St. Pierre as to how things like communication, jurisdictional field of communication makes it impossible. They say that 2 points that they lack things like explanatory power because of the structural position. They simply explain all forms of bonds and analyze it in a single instance. Whereas we specifically talk about the basic points. If we want to survival strategies or good evidence, you can independently affirm, because even if the sort of semiotic claim is true, you can still affirm a sort of strategy that is uniquely good for disabled debaters to materialize strategies against things like disfluency. Now we're going for the St. Pierre 5 evidence that they abstract away from the conversations of the 1C recreating forms of fluency, insofar that they're saying that we should not talk about the 1C. Instead, we should talk about a bunch of other things which recreates rigidity. The one that they say that it's like uniquely better, but on the 8 points that you just take it away from disabled debaters, CX specifically outlines as to how another disabled body won't look at things like the 1C, which is the explanation on the counterclaim 2 points that we could classify all of the specific internalism points that was in the overview on the alternative solves. 1 point that we outweigh on things like materiality, we equate single instances of strategy building within this round, which is all of the framing overview. First. Top level framing issue on the first off is that they're missing a robust internal link as to how any of their arguments are portable or exportable. There is no warrant as to even if I sort of read things like or meet their interpretation in the first place, that I would it would generate the strategies of all their standards. 2 points that I'm my own solvency advocate for the things like the 1C, and I'm external to the university and a disabled debater, which proves an external defense that counter interpretation that all of the violation, the exportability argument. 8 points that 8 points that it's not a meta level question, or they were crossed by the explanation of it from the overview. They say it's respectability, but it's not unique. It's not unique. I can read people who are external to the university and don't affirm certain positions. They say that there's inclusion, but inclusion is a performative contradiction. They specifically outline multiple reasons as to why things like debate is bad in the first place, which uniquely outweighs it as a matter of reason for them to drop them, because they knew it was bad, but they did it anyway. The ontological accuracy argument is not unique. Crossed by the explanation of how they do it. They don't warrant as to why someone outside the university would magically solve this. The third off. Top level on the third off is that the alternative has zero explanation as to how it resolves things like the specific libidinal words coming off the ontology page, which means that you shouldn't allow new tuner extrapolation because it wasn't in the 1C, nor was it remotely warranted out. If you cannot outline as how the lyrics of those songs resolve the claim, you should affirm, because they resolve nothing. Now, top level framing issues at 1% risk of defense on any of the ontology claims means that you should vote affirmative. It's like Pascal's wager. If they're right about social death, things can get worse, but there is no disadvantage to trying, which is all of the materiality wing of the framework. The libidinal investments argument. 1 point is that empirical events cannot lead to things like an ontological impact. That's like saying me doing something active violence will cause future generations to be damned. B point is that humanism isn't good or bad, but can be strategically employed. They can't explain why racism is bad without using things like humanistic grammar in the first place. Natal alienation doesn't justify ontology. Orphans aren't socially dead, but now permutation to the affirmative and the alternative. The net benefit is the materiality wing that we did above. Now the counterplan. One is that permutation do the counterplan in every other instance except for the affirmative. 8 points crossed by the personality wing coming off the St. Pierre evidence, which outlines how uniquely good for disabled people to have their own narratives for things like disfluency, which is an independent dissent and a reason to prefer. B points they conceded that that's
You made an argument on case that like cross-applied to the counterclaim. What was the argument?
That was the question. Like, it's good for us to specifically be doing our own forms of discrimination away from the apparatic interruption. It was more explained in the first on case.
Other than the Burcon, is there any other reasons to draw you?
No.
Oh, do you need a block?
No, 360.
Okay. I guess the clearest way to say this is, for flowing sakes, it will be each sheet in the one in the order. So, yeah. Each offs in the order that they were read, and then case. Okay. Is anyone not ready? Okay.
Not going for deep without answer the perfect right now. You say the inclusion is a perfect form of contradiction, but one no, it's not a form of contradiction because you can advocate for inclusion by recognizing that the space is inherently by 2 points that if I don't go over the criticism, it's not a form of contradiction because it's a conditional, it's conditional flow. They're not done the actual internal link and also the warranty of what was actually contradictory about advocating for inclusion independently. About proof comes good as food and use case water, saying the box for different ways, good for education, because find numerous ways to generate class, good for in the box because it allows you to be shifty. Against white, next to the tendency to be rough, you know what I mean, that are used to maintain the box next to the I claim that you lose for self criminalizes blackness for trying to safely navigate into like makes environmental safety, which means that these three reasons Washington and RBI on a perp cut inequality. I'll go for another RBI on a perp cut. That was a conceded argument into one and see that there's a culpability term in any indict that they prescribe by form of something that is contradictory or it was because it ignores the way that black individuals have their action influence as a result of as a result of so for certain disabilities, so right there kind of association is occupied a space of anti-vaxxers too that lets white people off the hook for their kind of ableist and problematic actions such as performing contradictions and because you have to focus on kind of what I'm doing wrong as a black individual, which is the award is extended from the one seems to be we have 4 independent reasons they need to be back before having any offense and why I should not have it in our ground. And they can code of critique fluids, condition, obviously, for test competition, and from kind of test competition, obviously defense. On that, counterpoint. Both negatives to redact the affirmative debate as a speaking subject and indicate the voice of niggas speaking of one and see the counterpoint tells one or all of the following. A is a figurative redaction and annotation by voting negative to credit us for the one and see. B is a literal annotation redaction by writing an app file of signing in favor of Strake Judge C. C is voting negative because our method of annotation redaction is surrender to blackness or magnify black voices and black disabled voices is valuable and productive. Draw a line from the 1 yard to the 2 yard. The 2 yard literally has to be new to have any some form of offense or any chance of winning on the slope. It's do not give this kind of new leeway because they're just not grappling with the internal ones. So why redaction and annotation are good ideas? Why surrendering to blackness is a good idea? And I'm going to do the work why surrendering to blackness is uniquely contextual to the affirmative for black and stable voice that they do not able to grapple with the counterpoint competition to in turn to competition because textual competition we have completely different text analyses. That's the different from the affirmative. Functional competition, voting affirmative means you pass the affirmative and you vote for the affirmative. As a non-person called today, voting negative means you have endorsed redaction, which is functionally different methodology. Next to the neural means reading the evidence, something they have to clarify specifies redaction of their non-black speaking positionality. Also would be voting on them, which kind of is counterproductive to the black positionality of surrounding the blacks. Next is that the counterpoint is literally putting niggas in the place of it. So as a speaking subject, so it's a handling competitive and they are not a black person or a black subject, which means they need this activity of doing the opposite competition, extend the sharp evidence of black annotation and redaction in the form of making motor communication sensible and legible to black communities. Redaction in the form of literally blacking out the right out study, for example, redaction of government documents, blacking content that is not meant to be read, non-black voices are not meant to be heard, that are not meant to be drowned out black voices because they kind of consistently drown out black voices and we were in the black voices and invisible. Annotations like annotation of notes, the mark is a mark, but in the sense of marks of transformation of blacks to make black lives and black voices visible. In this context, it's about making black disabled voices visible in a world in which now black disabled the debater is speaking on behalf of the affirmative, while kind of specific connotations of what it means and what is valuable for a black disabled debater. This is how we as a practicality of black families and communities legitimately use annotation redaction to cope with and resist the state sanctioned violence imposed on members of the community. Improvement through the annotation redaction of Michael Brown and George Ford autopsies is the form of showing anal black this annotation redacting. As you can see, it's imperative for the affirmative to be accessible and productive for niggas. So to be outweighed in practicality, celebrating real evidence, which is a game over framing. This is surrender to blacks is what you should frame your ballot around as a demand and a command of of terms of permutation, and is a clear ballot choice because this is a demand for the judge to surrender to the ballot, and the debaters to surrender the content of the affirmative to the picks from the box, concern the wax to turn solves the case because any form of revolution practice along any lines that race, gender, sexuality, disability, or kind of state relations, or whatever the case is, was centralized blacks, which is how you should frame your ballot. Only impacts that are valuable for data should matter. They need to explain how the impacts of voting affirmative is productive for black communities. What the one doesn't even do, despite CX kind of pointing out, you still do not explain the internal link of why you're uniquely valuable for black disabled communities, and how you have an explain their power and kind of survivability strategies uniquely for these groups. You assume some kind of totalization between black disabled bodies and non-disabled bodies, ignoring the kind of difference of positionalities, absent of patriarch, and especially implementation failed on account of regular for blacks because they assume solidarity to the content of the affirmative. Accountability outweighs the magnitude because aim blacks is a singular, do no crew and force outweighs the scope because aim blacks is a global force in every non-conformed to lives and through aim blacks which warrants the severity of American communities for the blacks is turns and solves cases because we can understand all relationships of violence to aim blacks because it tells us everything together means a risk. The pick the something to combat aim blacks is a risk that we can explain and resolve. The one is the impact surrender. The blacks is part of accountability looks like surrender means speaking something out. The line one argument permutation to counter does not make sense because no, this is specific to this round. You just not making a vision of how those CX and every single speech, including the affirmative, is kind of not contextual. So what does your affirmative do for the voices of black disabled bodies? You footnote niggas, which is the permutation to counter and every other instance. This is still a bad instance to do. Your affirmative actually counter yes, you're kind of speaking subject may matter, but it's about the prior our counter is a prior question to the ways that U.S. is not making individual our existence speaking subject because the question of what does you do for black disabled voices and what can you do for black disabled voices between the counterpoint solves this because you can do the affirmative but interrogate your non-blackness and how it's parasitic to black disabled debaters. You are not acknowledging a differentiation between black disabled debaters and non-disabled debaters, which is why the counterpoint is key to redact your positionality speaking subject to kind of rectify and interrogate those positionalities that you can do the affirmative. You say it's good for us to do it, but no, you can see the arguments in cross-examination. In every speech there's a portable that there's nothing that you can kind of contextualize like black people who are not kind of understood as disabled. The affirmative does nothing for it, nor does it do anything for the black disabled body. So the question of specificity, the case proper, the framing reconcile, outweigh probability confers no kind of portability outweighs because the question of how can the black disabled bodies access the affirmative controls internally to who's able to access the affirmative and do anything for the affirmative. You say the question of survival is an independent reason affirm, but no, it's not an independent reason affirm because they're not doing any internal and robust analysis of how they're good for survival of black disabled bodies. Once again, the arguments have to be new because they were just not anywhere in the speech. You should not be given a new argument. So what are you doing for the survival of black disabled bodies in addition to redaction and surrender the black? So the key to kind of counterwrite that and make it necessary for black disabled bodies to have some form of survival and endurance in a world where non-black disabled people just kind of conflate the distinction between black and non-black.
I have 48 seconds. Would you mind outlining the first or the first one?
Yeah. So black perp comes good because it's fluidity to escape whiteness and anti-blackness.
And the second place, or the second reason was the extension of the case argument, right?
No, that was the fourth. The second was that it's an attempt to achieve fugitivity by rupturing norms in debate, i.e. by intentionally being contradictory as a fugitive strategy.
Okay.
Last is that it criminalizes me saying that I should lose for it, when I'm just trying to navigate any black spaces. And then the last one was the extension of the case argument.
Good. Order will be quickly on case the shell, just like the first one debate, the second off. Everyone, anyone okay?
Extend the rule that vows to vote for the debater best challenges, able normative, communicated structure, clean conceded, all of the analysis coming off the ones he has to have, like the debate structure against disabled bodies, which uniquely outweighs will be more of the way of weighing later, but extend our offensive things like dispensity, implode moments of debate by using personal systems of dispensity to create peace and a fight from these normative systems. There was no real pushback on the two and on the case part, which means you should vote of it. Perfect. Top level of the performative contradictions that you should hold in mind all their arguments and reasons as to why things like performative contradictions are uniquely good, not as to why they should get an RV idea based off of the performative contradictions. None of these arguments are contextual with things like fairness, etc., which means that you should feel very skeptical of voting on it, and the rest of them on we'll just do the top down versus the top down 1 point relies on the theory of power. They didn't go for on the ontology because that's how things like is uniquely structured the form where as how society does the attempt of fugitivity argument hasn't justified as to why this uniquely good or why that's a reason for them to get the ballot independently of a performative contradiction. They say that criminalizes you, but a point is no, it doesn't. It allows for you to sort of, or it points out, allows for you to justify your model in the later speeches, which is uniquely good for proving as to how your world of battle is good under your epistemology. The case argument wasn't implicated whatsoever as an independent reason to negate, which means that you should view it as mitigatory defense, which was the premise off of the critique, which means that you shouldn't vote off of it. The second option. Extend all of the analysis coming off the one era as to how things like materiality outweigh. The question that you should be asking yourself when submitting your ballot is what does your ballot do to resolve conditions that each of us outline? One is that we're distinctly winning as to how things like the one EC is a uniquely good practice for disabled debaters to sort of find comfort within the debate space and generate strategies within the debate space. They have not done any type of robust internal link analysis as to how they create spillover, which was our argument at the top of the 1 year, or as to how things like the counterplay change materiality in the first place, which means that if there's a risk of defense, you should feel very, very comfortable affirming. Next is that, next we'll respond to their framing issue. One is that the framing issue isn't contextual to things like disability, and two is that it was not made in things like the one and see. Their car is a reason as to why things like the counterplay is uniquely good, whereas our explanation coming off the rollabout was both in the 1C and the 1 year, which means that you should view the rollabout as the highest layer. If you are viewing the rollabout as the highest layer, the only thing that you should vote off of is a question as to whether or not the 1EC is a good idea for disabled debaters. Now we're going to be going for the argument that they're missing the sort of internal net benefit as to how they're taking away the personality or the personability of things like the advocacy, which is uniquely good and was all of our survival strategies explanation, and the 1 year, which is terminal defense. The practicality weighing argument, 8 point, is that the permutation, 8 points that we're not going for the permutation, rather we're just going for like the impact into things like the next argument is that determine the judge's the judge obligation. One is that is really new. There was no roll about coming off the tweet, nor was there any explanation, which means that you default to the 1C explanation. They say it's the repetition or the repetition argument. 1 point is that it's not a question of repetition, rather as to what is uniquely good for disabled debaters. They say that it's a bad instance of things like the affirmative in the first place, but insofar that we're winning, that we're disabled, that means that it's